Hello everyone, this is Alicia Walton and today we are going to be talking about informal reports in technical communications, designing visual information in technical communications, using parallelism in your writing, and for those of you who have a weak spot in this area or who might just need a little bit of a brush up, revising run-ons. So let's get started with informal reports. Informal reports in technical communications keep communication flowing. These report types include progress reports, trip reports, meeting minutes, and peer review reports. Just like the other reports section that we covered, there are tons of informal reports within technical communications that we could find names for and go over here, but these are just some basic types. But really, informal reports can be divided into two different types, and I think Lannon and Gurek do a great job with this, and this is how I prefer to teach this section too. They divide out reports into informational versus analytical. There are two types of reports: informational and analytical. And for some reason I can never spell informational. There we go. I finally got it. Alright, here are these two types. So you might be wondering, what are these two types? It's pretty simple, all within the name. So informational strictly provides data. Or answers basic questions. Or answers the basic queso, according to this. I think we all know what's on my mind. So, what kind of reports answer basic questions and stick to data? Progress reports. Progress reports merely give an update of what's going on with either a project, or it can be a full project. It can be a small project that you're working on. It can be a progress report on your own development within the company. And this is just data, and it's meant to answer specific questions. Typically, your manager will give you questions that need to be answered, or you will know that questions that need to be answered within the progress report. The basic who, what, when, where, why. Except maybe take out the why. So the who, what, when, where. Now the other type of report, it gets to be a bit more interesting. The analytical report. For the analytical report, you're not just providing information, you're actually analyzing the information too. So you provide and analyze the information. So an example of this would be a recommendation report or a peer review report. These are both reports in which you're going to be providing information, and you're also going to be putting in your own analysis. So within the informational reports, the people reading these specifically need to be able to put their hands on data. They're usually your boss or even your boss's boss, and they need to actually just strictly have data so that they can understand what's going on within their company. The analytical reports, now that's a bit different. It's not just the data, but it's the why and the how behind it. So it gives you a chance to put your input and feedback within the report. And so this can give you a chance to shine. It can give you a chance to show diplomacy. And it also allows you an opportunity to communicate on the record within your own company to others. Now, when you're writing each of these, you want to make sure that you do and go through the exact same process that you go through when you write anything. Think about your audience. What does your audience need to know? What kind of information are you supposed to be providing them? You've been asked to provide a report, so what should that report include? If you're confused about what you're supposed to be including in the report, ask your manager for the last report they gave and see if they'll let you use that as a template. You can also look back at this book and look at some of the basic reports that are here. One of the things that I've done in the past is if you need a template, you can look at Google and just Google a professional looking template and make sure that you take away any information that would be connected to another company and include the information that only your boss wants. Now, obviously, if your boss has already told you not to refer to Google or anything like that, don't do it. Just make sure that you try to use as professional and as polished of looking a document as you can. Always go over it, make sure that you've taken out any words that aren't necessary to communicating the information you need to communicate, and also make sure that you're still using correct English. Make sure that you're also spelling everything correctly, and make sure that you've capitalized where you need to capitalize and used all the punctuation that you should be using. For more examples of reports in technical communications, please take a look at your textbook. Now let's go further and talk about designing visual information. Designing visual information for reports and presentations allow us to be able to communicate information in an enhanced way. It allows for us to also be able to answer questions by showing things like pie charts and graphs so that our audience can look at numbers differently. Visuals make data easier to interpret and understand. So we've covered why visual aids are important within technical communications, but how do you use them? But first, we have to determine when do we use visuals. In general, you should use visuals whenever they make your point more clearly or more effectively within your text. You should also use them for more than just decoration. Use them to support a point. While decoration for a document can be good and it can capture your audience's attention, you want to make sure that you actually make a point with them. When it comes to visuals, there's a ton of different types of visuals that you can use. So some examples include, even within the Word document that I'm using, for example, if you have the latest version of Word, you can actually insert 3D models, which can be a little bit of a pain, as you see while I'm waiting for them to load. But it can be quite helpful if you're trying to communicate information in various fields. And even within this, for example, I can go into classroom 3D models or architecture, etc., and look for models to use of pictures. We can also create tables. I can put in an Excel spreadsheet or a snippet from an Excel spreadsheet. And now I know you might be thinking, when am I going to use an Excel spreadsheet within a presentation? I've actually used those more often than I've used pictures within presentations when it comes to presenting information within a committee meeting or within a work meeting. You may also use charts or graphs, depending on whether or not you're trying to show a comparison of information that provides a timeline or introduces a label of, for instance, how much revenue has grown over the past 20 years. If you want to show that, or show what type of revenue has grown within a company, or if it hasn't grown, you might decide to use a chart to show those numbers based on the year. There's also bar graphs and Gantt charts, PERT charts, all kinds of stuff you can use. And if you look to your book, you can see examples of all of these. And they will provide different ways to show time, figures, costs, etc. And it shows it in a way that can provide the information more quickly than if your audience was sitting there reading piece by piece what you were giving them. Another popular thing you can use is a flow chart. Flow charts are very helpful, as well as tree charts, specifically when trying to understand the hierarchy of an organization or even a product line. So once you know when you need to use a visual, which is obviously to make a point and not for just decoration, how do you choose which visual you should be using? Well, again, I would go through this list and see what makes the most sense based on what information you're trying to provide for your audience. Again, it goes back to audience analysis. For every document that you create, you're going to analyze your audience and consider, what does my audience need to know? How can I provide that information for them in the best possible way? So consider which visual works best for your audience based on the information that you're providing them. And of course, you'll also want to consider what's available to you in terms of what you can use as far as software goes. There's software that your company, of course, will have licensing to, and you can also get creative with Google Docs and with the extensions there as well. Once you've created your visuals, it's a good idea to run them past someone and make sure that they understand the information that you're trying to present. And it's also good to make sure that it's easier to present the information via this visual that you've created rather than some other way. Personally, I've spent time getting invested in one individual chart, when then later on I've found that I really needed to create another one that could have been a lot more simple. And running this past someone else that you trust, such as a colleague, or even if it's not information that needs to be kept secret, even if it's your significant other and you run it past quickly, as long as there's no legal implications there, of course. As long as it's conveying the information quickly, effectively, and it looks good, then you're doing your job. And after this presentation, you will see a link to an example of using visual information to convey messages quickly. It's kind of a funny take on using visual aids to communicate information quickly and efficiently, but it does a great job of making some of the points that I've talked about here. So next up, we're going to talk about parallelism. So first off, what is parallelism and why do you need to be using it? It's simple. Parallelism is just the act of making your writing or making information parallel. And you do this by using matching words, phrases, or clauses to express equivalent ideas. And the goal is to create a balance and coherence in your writing. And this can also be done by presenting information not only with matching words or phrases, but within the design of a document as well. Or in the layout. The goal is to establish relationships between equivalent ideas. So right now you might be wondering, how do I do this? Well, one of the ways you can do this is by listing items in a series. An example of this would be, and this is presenting information in a series with parallel terms. And an example would be eat, drink, and be merry. Another example would be I came, I saw, I conquered. Another example would be providing a list. So Emily went to the store for 3 reasons. Or let's make it for 3 items. Cookies, cake, and coconuts. And that's considered parallelism. The lists. It's even more parallel because the items all start with C, right? It doesn't have to be that way. Your items in a series don't all have to start with a specific letter unless you're writing poetry, of course. But for our purposes, it just makes it more interesting. This is not the only way that you can make information parallel. Another way that you can make information parallel within a document is with paired items. And so the idea here is that paired words, phrases, or clauses should be presented in parallel terms. So the first example is, the thank you note was short and sweet. Short and sweet are the items that are parallel here. The research focused on muscle tissue and nerve cells. Muscle tissue and nerve cells are the parallel items here. Now, why are they the paired up items? Because they are both, not only are they part of the body, but they're both the research that was focused upon. Short and sweet are paired up because they're both used, the two words used to describe the thank you note. And then, of course, something that the series kind of brought you into as well. We can also use lists and outlines to make information parallel. So items in a list should be parallel. An example would be the cake had 4 ingredients. And let's go ahead and put this down. Let's say we would make it, never mind. Looks like I can't make it have numbered ingredients right now. But let's say the cake had 4 ingredients. Flour, eggs, milk, and butter. And this is considered a parallel list of items because I've listed them in the same way. So, for example, I've just listed them as single items. If I had said something along the lines of flour is the first ingredient, and then left these other 3 ingredients listed like they are, this would not be parallel. Why would it not be parallel? Because they don't match. In order for this to match, I either need to take this off and not make it a sentence and just have it be an item, or I would need to make all 4 of these a sentence. And that's what being parallel is all about. It's about making them line up to match within the information that we're providing. And if you need more examples of parallelism and revising faulty parallelism and all kinds of other topics within the topic of parallelism, pardon me, then I encourage you to look at your handbook. Last but not least, we're going to talk about revising run-ons. So what is a run-on? A run-on is an error that occurs when two independent clauses are joined incorrectly. Basically, it's when you take two sentences and shove them together without connecting them. Because you have to have, whenever you take two sentences and bring them together, you need to have a word that connects them, or a conjunction, a coordinating conjunction that brings them together. And of course, when it comes to run-ons, there's two types of run-ons. There's the comma splice and the fused sentence. The fused sentence is the one I just described. It's the sentence that is smushed together. The comma splice is the sentence in which you take two sentences, you smush them together, and you try to connect them with a comma. Well, a comma doesn't work that way. So let's talk for a minute about this. So let's just quickly, I'll jot down the definition. So it's fusing two sentences together. Sometimes with a comma. And this is called a fused sentence. Now let's look at the sentence I just wrote. Fusing two sentences together, sometimes with a comma. That's obviously not a complete sentence, is it? So how would we make that, how would we revise this run-on? Because this is certainly a run-on of sorts, and incomplete at that. The act of fusing two sentences together, and then fused sentences is in parentheses, for if you might want to understand the technical term, what it's called. And then sometimes with a comma. How do we fix that? So the act of fusing two sentences together, sometimes with a comma. So there we go. We've connected it. And is a coordinating conjunction, and that's why that fixes it. Let's go a little bit more into it here. That might have been a bit confusing for you because I kind of just slapdash fixed that sentence that I created. But let me show you what I just did. In order to fix this sentence, first off, I decided to make it complete because it was an incomplete sentence that was smushed into another sentence. It's like two fragments smushed together, really. So I put a beginning to it. I made fusing lowercase. So the act of, and notice that I'm reading it, and I'm not just reading this for you, by the way. One of the ways that you can fix run-on sentences, and it's really the best way to fix them, is to read them out loud. It helps you to hear where the stops are and how it sounds incomplete when you hear it. Sometimes we put words in places in our mind and we don't realize it until we read it out loud. And if you find yourself putting a word in somewhere, or a comma, or the word and, then chances are that you probably actually need to type it into the sentence. So the act of fusing two sentences together, and I have the technical term in parentheses for people who want to know the technical term, and sometimes with a comma splice, and sometimes with a comma. Does that make sense? It does a little. Let's go on and try another example. So here's an example of a comma splice. Charles Dickens created the character of Mr. Micawber, comma. See, I tried to fix it. He also created Uriah Heep. So this is the comma splice. Now, let's correct this. So Charles Dickens created the character of Mr. Micawber and also created Uriah Heep. Now, did you just hear what I did? I added and in there. And I didn't even mean to. So one way to fix this would be to add the word and. Take that comma out. And that fixes it. That's one way to correct it. Why does that work? And is a coordinating conjunction. It's a rule within the English language, and it is just a rule, and that's how it is. Sometimes there's just no way around it. But it's one of those hard and fast rules within the English language that if you're going to put two sentences together, you need to have what's called a coordinating conjunction. Examples of these are and, but, for, and the list goes on. These are all words you can use to create a connection between two sentences. You just use a comma. That's called a comma splice. You have spliced together two sentences with a comma. You can also just make them two separate sentences. You could just take that out. And there you go. And that would be correct as well. Now a fused sentence would be, let's get out of this, if I can get out of this. So an example of a fused sentence would be, we'll take this same sentence and instead of using a comma, there's just nothing. So it's all just kind of smushed, right? Like I was saying before. There's not even a comma to attempt to splice that together. And it can be corrected in the same way we have above. So we just take out, and I'm just doing this as an example. So the corrected version, we can put the and in there, the coordinating conjunction. We can make it two separate sentences. We can rewrite the sentence if we need to. We could say that if we're rewriting. So there's several ways you can fix these. So if anyone looks at your papers, such as a tutor or an instructor, and says that you have difficulty with run-ons, comma splices, or fused sentences, make sure that you pay special attention to this. And make sure that you look over your papers before you turn them in. Especially if I've made a comment about them too, that you look over your paper before you hand them in, turn them in online, and make sure that you don't have any of these mistakes. And that is it for now. Thank you for watching.